Welcome to Campfire Academy. I'm Andrew Craissati. Today, we're talking about finding the right length for an earnings recap.
So, do companies often misjudge how much detail investors want in a recap? Why is that, or why not, and how?
So let's start off with the obvious question. How much detail does an investor want in a recap? And how do we go about analyzing that? Well, I hate to say it, but we're all very proud of our organizations and we all like to tell long stories about our organizations. So our inclination is that we have a lot to tell everybody and we assume that they want to devote a lot of time to listening to what we have to say. And we are frustrated when they don't necessarily exhibit the behavior that we would like. The truth is that most investors are overworked. If they are institutional investors, they have a lot of meetings, they're juggling many obligations, and in many instances, unless they are in the middle of an extremely complex investment decision, they want a summary, not the full version. And I have, in my own experience, had many experiences of a fund manager or a professional investment firm representative saying to me, I don't want the whole story, just tell me what I need to know. So there is a task here of trying to find an abbreviated way of taking what might be a 1-hour earnings conference call and turning it into something that is more efficiently digested. Earnings calls always take place during working hours, right? Which is, for many, the enemy. Don't interfere with my working hours. I got stuff I need to do. So creating some efficiency in reproducing that earnings call is terribly important. And companies need to be willing to accept that there is a much, much shorter version that is the headlines that come out of the longer form earnings call.
So, what kind of signals tell you that an earnings update is too long or too short to be effective?
When you set up an earnings call, depending on the technology that you use, you will see people dropping off the call, and you will be able to track, in theory, whether the attendance at the beginning of the call is the same as the attendance at the end of the call. In the case of Campfire, you see that literally at every second throughout the content's duration. So you know precisely when the audience is showing up and when they're leaving and when they're coming back or whatever their behavior is. Generally, an update on the earnings or a set of extracts from the earnings is short and fast. That means it's between 5 minutes and 10 minutes. That is dictated by the complexity of what you need to communicate. So if you're going to be effective in getting the summary of the earnings call across, then you need to firstly understand the subject matter, extract the headlines accurately and effectively, and then turn that into a piece of audio through skilled editing. So if you have a recording of, let us say, an hour-long call for the analysts to consume, the real skill in converting that into a, shall we say, an executive summary is in the editing. So that you take 55 minutes and turn it into 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes are the correct 5 minutes that deliver the right nuance. They don't accidentally create an unintended consequence. So when we are editing a conference call for our clients and we're bringing it down to a 5 to 10 minute duration, the review of that draft edit is very important to make sure that we haven't created any unintended consequences and yet we've got the right amount of information across.
Where is there a risk of trimming too much context from a recap?
There is a risk, obviously, that you can get it wrong in terms of creating a recap or a summary of the quarterly information. And you're going to get it wrong because you take too much out. And by taking too much out, you have changed the story that is being told. Somehow the nuance that came across in the 1 hour version has been completely lost in the 5-minute version. And as a result of which, the audience don't then fully understand why you didn't meet market expectations, why your profit has an extraordinary item within it. If you're not very careful in how you edit and you trim too much content, then the recap will not only be problematic for you because it is misleading, but it won't have actually done justice to the overall exercise of creating a quarterly result. So you really want to be careful in making sure that the editor of the recording has an expertise in understanding financial results and the quarterly narrative, and then making sure that you are controlling the narrative by reviewing the draft edit and ensuring that that draft edit is precisely what you want it to be.
Have you seen any data or examples that you could share that would help understand the sweet spot for engagement time?
So maybe I can give you an example of how this works in reality in terms of taking a long-form piece of content and turning it into a short-form piece of content. So as part of the services that we provide our clients at Audi Campfire is we have the ability to turn text into audio using a mixture of automation and human input. And we also have the ability to edit a piece of audio down to a shorter form episode. So, for example, it's not unusual for us to take a 1 hour webinar that a client creates and then turn it into a 5-minute piece. So we have a client that is an investment syndicate, if you will. It is several hundred of the world's leading investors who are part of a private club. And the private club hosts seminars, sometimes 2 or 3 times a month. And those seminars are expertise-led. These are discussions around an investment thesis. What is the future of the price of oil? What is the likely demand for gold bullion over the next 10 years? Why is platinum an important commodity? Etc. And these are seminars that have a prominent guest speaker who is interviewed and who discusses the topic for an hour. And it is typically disseminated live as a video webinar. Many of the club members in this particular case are busy during ordinary working hours. They're in different countries around the world, and so there's also a time zone issue. So our client wanted to create an alternative version to the hour-long webinar, and we therefore provide a service in which we turn the video webinar into an audio experience. So we turn it into a podcast, and we edit it down from an hour to between 5 and 10 minutes, depending on the complexity of the subject matter and the efficiency with which the guest speaker answers questions and talks about topics. In that particular case, the engagement is really interesting. We are seeing that the content in its abbreviated form is being engaged for just shy of 100% of its running time, so between 5 and 10 minutes, whereas the webinar has a very small percentage of the community attending, and they are typically attending for between 1/3 and 1/2 of the 1 hour running time.
How does attention span or investor behavior shape the ideal length for an audio recap?
The audience for these recaps are typically quite sophisticated. They're either retail investors who have experience or they're institutional investors. And they are, for the most part, motivated by the idea of multitasking. when they are consuming content. So what we have learnt over the years is that the audience has a tendency to consume the content outside of ordinary working hours and while they are doing something else at the same time. So it's not too difficult to imagine that this is content that is consumed in the gym, walking the dog, jogging home in the evening, driving the car, commuting to work, going on holiday for the long weekend. The use cases for how the content is consumed is relatively predictable, but it is non-working hours in general. Therefore, you know that you want the content to have a short enough running time that it doesn't extend longer than the activity that the individual is engaged in. And that is typically a 30-minute threshold. So statistically, we know that on average, individuals are engaged in an activity for up to 30 minutes, and therefore creating content that runs up to 30 minutes is an equally sensible goal to set yourself. Where you are creating a recap or a summary of the content, we have learnt through experience that somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes seems to be the optimal amount of time that they want to listen for.
So what makes a short recap still feel complete and worthwhile to investors?
It would be quite easy to speculate that a shorter version of a financial results call is somehow less worthwhile or perhaps incomplete by comparison. The truth is that a lot of investors aren't necessarily going to exclude one over the other. So they will want to have a 5 to 10 minute headline only audio experience, but that doesn't mean that they have now discontinued the habit of reading the quarterly results, particularly the financial results section of that report. A profit and loss statement or a balance sheet or a cash flow statement will still very likely be analyzed by a member of the audience, but they will use the recap or the summary form to get the headlines across first, and then it'll help them think about what they want to study beyond that point or delegate the task to a colleague.
What are some of the best practices for structuring a 5 to 10 minute earnings summary so it still lands with authority?
So when you think about creating a 5 to 10 minute recap or summary of your quarterly results announcement, you want to take it as seriously as the results themselves. So who is the speaker? Is it someone who is important in the organization? Is, for example, the CEO or the chief financial officer the speaker? How carefully has that 5 to 10 minute piece been scripted or edited? Are the headlines in that short piece the same headlines that are in the long form announcements? And does the short piece successfully capture the key subtleties or nuances in that long form version? In terms of thinking about best practices around this, I would say the number one decision is the quality of the editor. So making sure that the editing of this piece is really carefully structured, and it's by someone who understands how to listen to an hour of content and pick the right moments.
If a company wanted to pilot a shorter recap, what's a good first step to take? And why might audio be the most logical format for them to move forward with?
So when you start thinking about this as a supplement to your information flow strategy, sensibly, you start off with a pilot. Take a past quarter, something that is no longer topical, and convert that into a pilot. So experiment, create a 5-minute version from a few quarters ago or from the previous quarter, and see what that sounds like. By doing that, as long as you use an expert to edit it and to create it, it will then turn the concept into a tangible product. And then you will completely understand what a 5-minute summary actually feels like experientially. And that will then help you to inform yourself on, obviously, is this something I want to do going forward? But it'll help inform whether or not you want to use audio as a means of doing so, whether it is a video podcast or a vodcast as a means of doing so. It will help inform the decisions that you make about what format and whether or not it's really going to work well for you. This has been Campfire Academy, an Audi production. To learn more about how you can capture investor attention and stay top of mind, visit